Last year.
Good afternoon. Government Operations Military Affairs Committee is meeting again. I knew when I said that we were probably meeting for the last time that was a mistake. I jinxed it. But in all seriousness, Representative Donahue has an amendment to bring on the H612, our miscellaneous cannabis bill. And Representative Donahue, well, tell us about your amendment.
Thank you. This would have simply been a divide the question to oppose one section, but you can't do it that way when it's an amendment coming back from the Senate. So it gets a little, what I have to say is, just so you're ready for it. I move to concur in the Senate proposal of amendment with further proposal of amendment thereto, striking section 2A and inserting in lieu thereof section 2A parentheses deleted. So if you look at your bill or I have the handout here, section 2A is where, to my surprise, and I'm sorry, this is last minute, but of course, seeing the Senate's bill coming back to us was last minute, that the Senate struck one of the pieces of what is banned as advertising, a statement or illustration that offers a prize, award, or inducement for purchasing cannabis or a cannabis product. And I guess part of the reason that that it caught my eye is being sort of tuned into the issue of how much awards or prizes like that are inducements to purchase products. And you know, we established the cannabis market and addressed advertising because we wanted to make it safe and legal, but we didn't necessarily want to promote an expansion of a market. We didn't want to say we want to encourage use, and that was why we set that out from the start. And so in our House Human Services Committee this year, when we were tackling the whole tobacco and vaping issue, we actually had a direct testimony about the way that that kind of, you know, having prize offerings and award really does induce new use. And so we included in our bill a ban on that for tobacco products. Of course, as you all know, despite the House endorsing that bill, it sadly is not becoming law this year. But that's, I guess, partly why it caught my eye, and it just surprised me that coming on a Senate amendment at the last minute for our body to fully consider to change what was established in current law in terms of advertising. And my understanding is there's also an intent that there's going to be some review going on about advertising and the advertising restrictions, and it would seem more appropriate to make changes based on the information that comes back from that review than just striking one, at least from a House perspective, a little off the cuff. So that's the proposal.
Yeah, Representative
No, thank you, Representative Donahue, and I completely understand the perspective you're bringing to the table, given our long conversations around some of these topics in the past. So I totally respect your position on this. Mostly the retailers, but other folks within the industry have cited difficulties with various aspects of the law that governs advertising and promotions, things of that nature. And when the conversations were going on in the Senate, they had substantially more requests for them to take a look at and possibly offer amendment 2. This seemed like a good compromise given the scope and breadth of those requests. And in that same conversation is also when on the amended language coming over from the Senate, section 18, the Cannabis Control Board report, the report title does state citing in outdoor cultivation, but if you take a look at C, yes, you'll see that the advertising language being reviewed is part of that assessment.
Yeah.
And so that'll do a lot to dictate where we go next time we take this conversation up. And it was felt that allowing this change, which was perceived by many to be a minimal adjustment, given the other aspects that they were looking for, seemed like a fair compromise.
As I mentioned already, just repeating myself, the fact that, you know, that's a report that's going to come back, it seems like taking that broader context. And I don't know if anybody came to you, or if you had that testimony or discussion when you when you were looking at the bill and chose to or not to do those changes now, but obviously this is coming from the other side, not a genesis of the House.
The request for changes to advertising were definitely positioned here. We didn't have time, given the scope of work that we did on setbacks and a bunch of the other language. So we didn't have time to take extensive testimony on it. The Senate looked at it deeper than us because we did the other brunt of work to set it up. So
I have some questions for legislative counsel, but does anybody, I think I understand Representative Donahue's proposal. Does anybody have any questions for Representative Donahue? Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shell, welcome back.
Finished up with y'all.
Yeah, well, you know, it's the GovOps. We just keep them coming back.
It's a try.
Thanks for being with us. So the amendment itself is pretty simple, but I wanted to understand the effect of the strike that the Senate did. My understanding of this is that there's, you know, our advertising restrictions are some of the strictest in the country, and that's for good reason. The language that we have in the existing statute that's struck here in number 4, it prevents like a retail cannabis establishment from giving away a hat with a purchase of cannabis, or a t-shirt, or a sticker, and like anything, like any kind of merchandise at the point of purchase is completely prohibited. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, Chair Pepper would probably be the best person to talk to you about like what kinds of things do they see and how are they enforcing this? Have there been issues around things like that, but I think that's generally along those lines around, if you, buy on, I think I saw advertisements about certain like specials on April 20th or things like that. But, if they had said, oh, you get a bumper sticker or a free t-shirt, or things like that, that would not be permitted in terms of the advertising.
Any other questions for Ms. Childs, Representative Higley?
Guess I do have one. So if we were to, so currently with the changes that the Senate made, can these establishments going forward still have a reduction in price? Like it states, except that price discounts are allowed.
So those are allowed under current law. So, like what I just said, when I mentioned like the April 20th, someone said, oh, there's a discount today, or, those types of things. Those are currently not prohibited.
Right, but again, the Senate struck out that section that says that the discounts are allowed. Somewhere else in there that says they're allowed as well.
No, but it's like if it's not prohibited.
Yeah, so the clause that Representative Higley is referring to is
Right,
an exception to a.
It's an exception to a restriction.
So if you cut out the
So if you take
restriction.
a restriction, it doesn't then mean, therefore, the exception to the restriction now becomes a restriction.
Wow, let's do that again.
So you can't offer price discounts now. If this passes, if the bill as it came over from the Senate passes, they would continue to be able to offer discounts.
This would be allowed.
Any other questions about the words on the page for legislative council? Thank you very much. Chair Pepper, would you like to join us? I think it would be,
Just open for.
Okay. I think it would be helpful for us to understand what in practice striking this particular piece of the advertising prohibitions would allow, what kinds of things we would see versus, what's going on today.
Sure. For the record, James Pepper, Chair of the Cannabis Control Board. What I see this is allowing is an advertisement that would otherwise need to be approved by the board. So you can't, this would be a very narrow circumstance because you can't actually advertise individual products. You can kind of advertise that you exist, where your place is located. But once you start advertising products or
That's the same.
then it's a prohibited advertisement. We don't approve it. So what this would allow would be for you to say, we have a prize wheel at our retail location. And if you buy a certain product, then you can spin it and you can get a free t-shirt or something like that. You could not get free cannabis because that's prohibited under sub 5. But you could get a 20% discount to a cannabis product or something along those lines. So it's a pretty narrow thing. It's certainly not a thing that we asked for. It was brought by the kind of retail associations that exist. It was actually a much more sweeping proposal before it was pared down by the Senate Economic Development Committee. And it also includes a study committee, I think, that would allow the board to kind of assess all of the other stuff that they asked for. And how that would change our internal processes. This one, does not change our internal processes. It just would mean that those types of kind of like spin the wheel or, get entered into a raffle for a prize could go through. So.
Representative.
Could you, not in length, but go through some of those other conditions that they were looking for?
They wanted to strike the offers free samples of cannabis. We opposed that one. The cannabis board, I did oppose that. There are some tax implications that the tax department was not willing to kind of fully vet with the committee, just given the time. But also there's purchase limits on cannabis. So if you just said you can offer free cannabis, then you could certainly start to exceed those purchase limits. They wanted to change all of the advertising compliance to a complaint-based process. What we do now is we pre-approve advertisements. It takes us about 7 days to kind of get back to people. What we've noticed, I've testified here before, is that about 50% of the advertisements that we review are non-compliant for one reason or another. And so if we went to a complaint-based process, you would see about 50% more advertisements that are illegal out there. And we would have to kind of be in the position of chasing those people down, issuing administrative penalties, potentially putting them out of business totally. And, we just feel like the fact that we're seeing 50% denial rate means that there's a lot more education that needs to happen around what is a compliant versus non-compliant ad at this time. So that's kind of why I feel like the study committee is important so that we can really kind of see, so we don't get proposals like this or in the Senate kind of at the last minute. And this one I don't think is all that broad or sweeping, but I think that some of the other things that were being requested would fundamentally change the way that we do business at the cannabis store.
This type of thing, like entered into a raffle for a t-shirt, when you come on 420 or whatever, would that advertisement still have to go through the compliance process?
That advertisement would, yep, even if it's just in the store, you know, because we still look for things that are appealing to children, things like that.
Yeah.
So the other aspects of the advertising statute still have to be met, even for the kind of the spin wheel or the sweepstakes or the raffle. So,
Yeah, so there's still that umbrella of the compliance process and all of the other prohibitions that would apply. So we're just taking out this like this inducement prohibition wouldn't change your compliance process. Every advertisement that a retailer wanted to put out would still have to go through the review.
Right.
Representative Nugent.
I'm not fully familiar with all the restrictions, so I'm just wondering, like, does that apply to the product itself also, like the type of thing that it would be, not just the message on it?
yes, the form of the product follows that same kind of can't be appealing to youth. I know that we've been through this in this committee. There are things like gummies out there, but there are no things like gummy bears or gummy worms or Skittles or anything that mimics a well-known candy that's marked that would be exceptionally appealing to a teen. So yes, the advertising laws apply both to the packaging, and the kind of products themselves.
You consider things that youth find appealing because it makes them feel like they're being like adults, or is it?
Well, this is a very, I mean, once you start
Yeah,
going too deep here, like, you know, I think that the only, I don't even know where it ends. Like, you know, does everything have to look like broccoli or Brussels sprout? You know, like what are things that are not appealing to youth? You know, and then everything has to look.
there's a whole sign.
You know, it's a really tough, it's a tough call. We try and stick to the kind of the things that are very obviously appealing to youth. We don't allow kind of bright colors. You know, a lot of the stuff that I see, even like the Lawson's Finest cans, they look like Dr. Seuss pictures. We don't allow any of that stuff in the cannabis world.
All right. Any other questions for Chair Pepper on this? So, committee, we need to take a position on Representative Donahue's amendment here. I am cognizant of the fact that we are basically on an adjournment day here, and that sending this bill back to the Senate at this point may essentially be the end of the entire bill, which has really important, very important policy in it. And I think this is a relatively minor expansion of the ability to advertise that still has to fall under all of the other prohibitions. So I am looking forward to seeing what the study committee brings back if I am back here next year and continue to work on cannabis policy. And I think that we should look at it in the totality. But at this point, given that any of these advertisements would still have to go through Cannabis Control Board and comply with all the other prohibitions on advertising, I don't really see the need to argue with the Senate over this particular point. So it would have been a choice that I would have made in our committee, and that's part of the process we have here is the disagreement between the two bodies. But on balance, I think I want to see the rest of the policy and bill go forward, and that this has a relatively minimal impact on the advertising regime that we have right now. So I would entertain a motion to find the amendment not favorable. So Representative Hooper has made that motion. Is there any further discussion? Representative Nugent.
Can see that point and agree with you that on the whole, it's a good policy. But I just feel like it's important to say that the advertising piece is really important, and it does have a huge impact on youth, and getting youth to try new substances the way that you create lifelong customers. And you know, whether it's a t-shirt or like a koozie or whatever, it's like The idea is that you have that thing, the thing is harmless, and then the person thinks of the substance in a similar way. So it's a cycle, it's like a long-term thing that does, could have a big impact depending on what this ends up looking like in Vermont. So I'm curious to see what the study brings back, and I hope that, I think when you look at the way substance industries act over time, they tend to just keep pushing the limits, which is part of my hesitation always is like, yeah, in a vacuum, this might not be a big deal, but over time it has a cumulative effect and it's much harder to pull back, as we can see with S18, than it is to keep the restrictions in place. And I think Vermont has like one of the best regulatory regimes in the whole country that has a chance of succeeding. So it's hard for me to see the Senate having done that, but.
Representative.
Yeah, just real quick, I agree. I think, as Chair Pepper talked about, there was 50 non-compliant advertisement issues already, and I just think this would overload the board with, people trying to figure out what they can and can't do. And, there is the study coming up, and I'm like you were just spoken, I'm surprised that the Senate actually pulled this piece out.
And go and represent.
Yeah, thank you. I am not in favor of any advertising at all for this particular product. So this is a really easy decision for me. I'm disappointed in the Senate and I don't want to support their efforts in this respect.
Representative Bray.
Representative Hagel and I are on the same page. I think that, it was compromised for me to go this far with advertising. I don't feel any shame in keeping all the gray areas out and as much as possible, which is not real possible, protecting children as much as possible.
So I think the thing for me here is that we're not allowing any additional advertising. What we're allowing is for advertising that would be approved to be able to include things like, you can get entered into a raffle or you could get a free hat.
But then it becomes word of mouth, which is effectively advertising.
Representative Waters.
I just want to clarify that these things don't apply to anywhere other than a place where they would already be limited to whatever cannabis related activities are going on, correct?
Well, where you're allowed to advertise, which is essentially the store.
Within a retail, right, that's what I'm saying. It's not like you're gonna be at the park on a Saturday morning giving away T-shirts. It's really contained to what already are the parameters that exist, right?
And they're probably giving away a T-shirt that would be able to be purchased anyway.
Chair Pepper,
Yeah.
you want to?
Yes, I mean, the most important piece of the advertising law, which I think is not, you'd have to go back to the statute, but there's a definition of advertisement, it's any communication. And then in order for it to be approved, the minimum threat, the very first threshold question is the audience who's going to see this advertisement reasonably expected to be less than 15% under the age of 21? And that's where a lot of advertisements fail. You have to submit to the board demographic, audience composition, demographic data to show that, that's why you don't see advertisements on TV or on the radio. There's some newspapers that have this demographic data that show that that their readership is under the age or over the age of 21.
Yeah.
And so you see some newspaper ads, but then they still have to follow the rest of this. They can't be false or misleading. They can't promote overconsumption. They can't represent curative effects. They can't offer free samples. They can't appeal to people under the age of 21. So once something is deemed an advertisement, then we look at the demographic data, then we evaluate it from these other perspectives. And so the only people that are seeing advertisements are the advertisements to the general public are just flat out prohibited because the general public can't meet that demographic data or that audience composition metric.
Pepper,
Yeah.
Could you talk to us about how, so, you know, we're really focused on this amendment right now, but I'm thinking about it in the greater context of the bill, right? Because I feel like for all intents and purposes, our vote on this amendment is going to be a vote on whether this bill becomes law in a timely way. And so we've got to look at this amendment in the context of where we're at in the legislative process. So what's some of the other things that the Cannabis Control Board is prioritizing in the bill itself?
Right. So I'm just gonna have to go from memory here because there's 20 different sections in this. But the hemp infused products is a really important piece, you know, making sure that those products are either banned, not being sold in gas stations, not being sold in convenience stores, and put through a regulatory framework. Very important. We just got word today, and I don't know if it's public or not, but another medical dispensary is closing. So we've now lost 2 of the 6 medical dispensaries. And my guess is that we're going to lose them all in the next year. I mean, they just aren't economically viable. That might not be a priority for this committee, but certainly the patients that rely on the privacy and confidentiality of that process and the individual consultation that occurs at the medical dispensaries is important to those patients. There's some increased protections in the medical program as well. The kind of tier regulate, I know we're going back in time now, but tier relegation, tier expansion, that allows us to keep this market small. That allows us to keep the operators in this market kind of as small cultivators and not kind of allow the natural consolidation that happens in almost every cannabis industry to happen in Vermont. That is a really important piece of this. The retail siting, another critical piece. You know, what we're seeing, and there are studies about the negative health impacts of retail density around alcohol stores, around cannabis shops. You know, what we're seeing is because of the opt-in, opt-out provision, we're seeing pockets of retail density around the state. And it's unnatural, and it's also, you know, we have no control over it right now. This bill allows us to look at population density and the needs of the market and spread out where we deny applications in places where there are density, you know, where they're already oversaturated in retail stores. Certainly the outdoor siting, the cultivation of outdoor siting was a priority of this committee and the healthcare committee and others. And, you know, the kind of Senate proposal reverts back to what this committee did with climate changes. I mean, there's a lot to this bill. And I think everything, almost all of it is what we asked for. And I say asked for because we have been recognizing dynamics and trends that are occurring, and it's we're trying to self-correct those. And we just need some of these provisions in order to do that.
So we have a motion to find the amendment not favorable on the table. Does anybody have any other questions or things to get on the table? All right, Representative Chase.
I agree with what you were saying, that there's a lot of stuff in this bill that is important for not just, you know, the industry, but keeping kids and consumers safe for the next year until the next biennium starts, whatever. And to add this amendment practically kills the bill. So regardless of how I feel about the advertising, I'm going to vote against the amendment.
Thanks. I just want to bring up that earlier today, we were talking about another bill that was kind of on the fence. And, you know, it was mentioned, oh, well, we still have a veto session where we can take it up. So, you know, it's not killing the bill. So it's my thought.
I think this relatively minor change in the advertising regime, with all respect to the concern about any change to the advertising regime, still in the context of us having the strictest in the country advertising regime when it comes to cannabis in any of the states that have a tax and regulated system. And I think there's still a ton of protections in place, especially in regard to children, and where you can even have advertising is really, really limited. So I'm gonna vote, I'm gonna vote to find the amendment not favorable, but I really appreciate the concern about the expansion of advertising. And as long as I'm involved in these conversations about cannabis, it's not going to be a priority for me to expand the advertising. I think what we're, but on balance, I want to make sure that this bill moves forward. So I think we're ready to take a position on this. So all those, so the motion was to find the amendment not favorable. So those in favor of that motion, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those opposed? 3. So the 732 to find it not favorable. Thank you. Thanks for doing the math for me, Representative Ward. So
We're at a point where math's hard.
thank you all so much.